In the summer of 2016, Melissa and Grant Fisher set out to hike one of Glacier National Park's most breathtaking trails, a route they knew well, surrounded by serene mountains and ancient ice. They were seasoned adventurers, the sort of couple who felt most alive beneath open skies. But somewhere along that trail, they vanished without a trace. Their car remained in the car park, their names on the ranger's logbook, and that was all. For 7 long years, the mountains kept their secret. Then, as the ice of the Grinnell Glacier began to melt under an unusually warm summer, something emerged from its frozen depths. 2 bodies, perfectly preserved, locked face to face, and bound together by handcuffs. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't nature's doing. And, as investigators soon realized, this discovery was only the beginning of a far darker mystery hidden within the heart of the glacier. Melissa and Grant Fisher were the kind of couple who made adventure look effortless. She was 32, a graphic designer with a quiet confidence and an eye for beauty in the smallest details. Grant, 6 years older, worked as a paramedic, calm under pressure, always the one to steady her nerves when storms rolled in or paths grew uncertain. Together, they'd spent years exploring the wild places of North America, from the red canyons of Utah to the icy lakes of Alberta. Glacier National Park had always been special to them. It was where Grant had proposed, under a sky so clear that the Milky Way seemed to hang just above their heads. When they decided to return there in July 2016 for what they called one last summer hike before the city life pulled them back, it felt like the perfect escape. The day they disappeared, the weather was clear, one of those rare Montana mornings when the air felt crisp but kind, and the sun broke through the peaks with golden warmth. They parked their SUV near the trailhead at Logan Pass, logged their route with the ranger, and set off around 9 a.m. It was supposed to be a simple day hike, a few hours up to the hidden lake overlook, lunch by the water, and then back before sunset. They'd done tougher trails before. Nothing about this one was dangerous. No storms on the radar, no bear warnings. It was, by all accounts, the safest hike in the park. By nightfall, however, their friends back in Whitefish began to worry. Melissa always checked in even when there was no signal. She somehow found a way. When she didn't reply to texts or answer calls, concern turned to dread. Rangers were notified just after midnight, and by dawn, a full search was underway. The operation that followed was one of the largest the park had seen in years. Search teams combed the trails in widening circles, using drones and scent-tracking dogs to follow even the faintest trace. Helicopters scanned the valleys and cliffs for signs of clothing, movement, anything. Volunteers, hikers, climbers, even off-duty park staff joined in, calling their names into the wind. But the forest stayed silent. No footprints, no campsite, no torn fabric caught on branches. It was as if Melissa and Grant had stepped off the trail and simply dissolved into thin air. Over the following weeks, speculation grew like wildfire. Some believed they'd fallen into one of the glacier's hidden crevasses, their bodies buried beneath decades of ice. Others whispered darker theories that they'd staged their disappearance, or that someone else had been with them on that trail. But there was no evidence, no note, no withdrawal from their accounts. Their SUV remained untouched, their camping gear still neatly folded in the boot. It was haunting in its simplicity. 2 people, gone, leaving only questions behind. Grant's parents flew in from Oregon, refusing to leave the park until every corner had been searched. Melissa's sister stayed with them in a small lodge near Apgar Village, where missing person flyers plastered every notice board. Each morning they'd watch the rescue helicopters lift off, their blades chopping the cold mountain air, and each evening they'd watch them return empty. Days turned to weeks, and hope thinned like mist at dawn. By mid-August, the official search was scaled back. Rangers quietly admitted what the families already knew: the mountains rarely gave back what they took. Glacier National Park had claimed its share of lives over the years through avalanches, falls, and sudden storms. Yet this case felt different, too clean, too quiet. No trace meant no closure, and for the Fishers' loved ones, that void became its own kind of torment. In the months that followed, the story faded from headlines, replaced by newer tragedies and fleeting scandals. But for those who'd known them, the mystery never stopped echoing. Friends described how Melissa's laugh could fill a room, how Grant always carried a first aid kit just in case. Their absence was like a shadow stretching across the lives they'd left behind, a reminder that even in places of breathtaking beauty, something unseen can wait, silent and patient, beneath the ice. In the summer of 2023, the northern face of the Grinnell Glacier began to shift. After weeks of unseasonable warmth, the once solid wall of ancient ice started to bleed away, revealing patches of stone and hollow pockets that hadn't seen sunlight in centuries. Rangers were monitoring the melt closely, worried about rockfalls or sudden slides, but what they found was something no one could have predicted: two figures emerging from the ice, side by side, preserved in eerie perfection. Their faces were pale but intact, their bodies locked in a strange, almost deliberate pose, kneeling opposite one another, wrists joined by a single pair of rusted handcuffs. At first, no one wanted to believe it could be the Fishers. Too much time had passed, too many theories buried under the years. But the clothing, Melissa's red waterproof jacket and Grant's distinctive hiking boots, left little doubt. After 7 years of silence, the mountains had finally given them back. And yet, instead of answers, they brought with them an even deeper mystery. Investigators arrived within hours, cordoning off the area and carefully cutting the ice around the bodies. It took 2 full days to extract them without damage, their forms still frozen stiff, like statues of some tragic ritual. A team from the Montana State Crime Lab was flown in to assist, along with specialists in glacial recovery from Alaska. When the examination began, it seemed straightforward, at least on the surface. There were no signs of trauma, no fractures, no bullet wounds, no defensive injuries. Their clothes were clean and dry, neatly zipped and buttoned, as if they'd been dressed with care. Even their backpacks were placed nearby, folded and organized. But as the forensic team thawed the bodies for a closer look, small inconsistencies began to emerge. Tissue samples showed that both Melissa and Grant had died roughly a week before being placed, or rather, positioned inside the glacier. Their lungs contained no glacial water, meaning they hadn't fallen through ice or drowned. They had been elsewhere when they died, and someone had brought them here. That revelation changed everything. It was no longer a tragic hiking accident. It was something intentional. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide their bodies in one of the most remote frozen regions of the park. But why handcuff them together face to face? What did it mean? The more investigators searched, the stranger it became. A few meters from where the bodies were found, a park ranger spotted something half buried in the ice, the corner of an old canvas backpack. Inside were decayed notebooks, a rusted compass, and a faded driving license belonging to a man named David Roach, a local climber who had disappeared in 1998, 25 years earlier. His disappearance had long been assumed to be accidental, the result of a fall somewhere in the high ridges. Now his belongings were lying just meters away from the Fishers' final resting place. It was too much to dismiss as coincidence. The press seized on the connection immediately, dubbing it the Glacier Link. 2 disappearances, decades apart, converging in one chilling discovery. The FBI became involved, quietly reopening Roach's old missing person file. Forensic analysts combed the recovered gear, searching for DNA or trace evidence, but the long years in ice had erased almost everything. Only fragments remained tantalizing, incomplete. Local rumors spread quickly. Some whispered about a hermit who'd lived deep in the park in the late 1992, a man who'd vanished just as Roach had. Others speculated about a cult, or a series of ritualistic killings hidden beneath the guise of nature's dangers. The truth, however, was more elusive. Rangers who'd worked at the park for decades said the glacier had always felt different, unpredictable, almost alive in its stillness. As one put it, it keeps what it wants, and it doesn't give back without reason. For the families, the discovery was both a relief and a nightmare. They finally had the chance to bring Melissa and Grant home, but they also faced a new torment: the knowledge that someone had done this deliberately, methodically, and without leaving a trace. And now, with the reappearance of David Roach's pack, investigators were forced to confront the unthinkable possibility that Glacier National Park might be holding the remnants of something far larger, something that had been hiding in plain sight for decades, sealed beneath the ice until the world was ready or doomed to uncover it. David Roach had been missing for so long that most people had stopped asking what had happened to him. His name was a footnote in the park's history. Another hiker swallowed by Glacier National Park's vast, indifferent wilderness. Back in 1998, Roach was 35, a field geologist contracted by the National Geological Survey. He was bright, methodical, and fascinated by the ancient ice formations that told the story of the Earth itself. Colleagues described him as solitary but not unfriendly, the kind of man who preferred rock samples and silence over crowded towns. His last known expedition was meant to be a short solo survey near the Grinnell Glacier. He radioed in once, noting strange shifts in the ice layers, then, without warning, he vanished. No gear, no footprints, no trace. At the time, it barely made local headlines. Glacier National Park had claimed its share of wanderers and wanderlust. But when his old backpack surfaced beside the fisher's remains 25 years later, interest in his story reignited, and with it came something far more disturbing. Inside the pack, preserved beneath layers of frost and decay, was a small, leather-bound journal. Its cover was cracked and water-stained, but most of the pages were still legible. What those pages revealed would change the entire shape of the investigation. In his earliest entries, Roach wrote like a scientist. Dates, coordinates, measurements, notes about soil composition and ice strata. But as the days progressed, the tone shifted. His neat handwriting grew uneven, the lines rushed and jagged. "I keep hearing it again," one entry read. At night, the crunch of snow, then silence. Too heavy to be wind, too slow to be animal. Another mentioned marks carved into the trees, not random scratches, but deliberate shapes. An intersecting triangle and spiral, repeated at varying heights, sometimes facing toward the glacier, sometimes away from it. He began to believe someone was watching him. By the middle of the notebook, his scientific detachment had vanished completely. "There's a cave," he wrote. "The readings show a cavity behind the southern ridge, possibly a collapse from the last thaw. I shouldn't go in, but something feels drawn to it." The next few pages were fragmented. Mentions of the cold whisper, a smell of metal, and a presence that moves when I don't. Rangers later described reading those words as like stepping into the mind of a man unraveling or discovering something he was never meant to see. The final entry was dated 3rd October 1998. Just 3 words, written in a trembling hand: "He's back. He knows I'm here." After that, the pages stopped. Investigators initially dismissed it as paranoia isolation-induced hysteria. But then, during a detailed examination of the recovered clothing from the fishers, a small symbol was found stitched into the inner lining of Melissa's jacket. It was almost invisible, hidden between the layers of fabric, a triangle intersected by a spiral. The same symbol Roach had drawn in his diary over 2 decades earlier. That discovery changed everything. How could Melissa and Grant, who'd never even been born when Roach vanished, have been linked to the same mark? Forensic analysts confirmed it wasn't a manufacturer's logo or a random pattern. It had been sewn in by hand, deliberately. The thread was synthetic but unusually old, matching a type commonly used in outdoor gear from the late 1992. The press dubbed it the Ghost of Grinnell Glacier. Some saw it as evidence of an unknown killer operating in the park for decades. Others leaned toward something more supernatural, an echo of the mountain itself, guarding its secrets with a vengeance. Online forums exploded with theories: a hermit, a cult, a ritual tied to the geological site. But one thread remained constant: the sense that whatever haunted the Grinnell Glacier wasn't done yet. Even seasoned investigators admitted privately that the atmosphere around the glacier felt wrong. Equipment malfunctioned. Drones lost signal. At night, rangers patrolling near the recovery zone reported hearing faint metallic sounds like chains moving under the ice. Officially, none of it was logged. But those who were there still talk about it, quietly, when the radio static hums and the wind begins to shift. For the families, it was unbearable. Melissa and Grant had simply wanted a weekend away, a moment of peace in the wild. Instead, they had walked straight into a story that began 25 years before they were born. A story that seemed to be rewriting itself, one frozen clue at a time. And as investigators pieced together Roach's last words, one question lingered louder than any other: who or what was he? The search for answers led investigators deep into the heart of Glacier National Park, following the same path David Roach had mapped 25 years earlier. Using coordinates from his journal and recent satellite scans, a specialized search team began combing the southern ridge, a remote, treacherous area few had ever reached. The air grew colder as they ascended, and radio contact weakened to little more than static. Then, after nearly 6 hours of climbing, one of the rangers spotted it: a narrow fissure in the ice wall, half hidden by rock and shadow. It wasn't marked on any map. When their torches swept inside, the beam caught the unmistakable shape of a tunnel, a cave, descending into the mountain itself. The entrance was tight, forcing them to crawl on hands and knees. The air was stale and dry, carrying a faint metallic scent like rust or old blood. After several meters, the passage widened into a small chamber. The walls were lined with crude carvings, shapes resembling the triangle and spiral symbol that had haunted the investigation from the beginning. In the center of the room sat a makeshift cot, fashioned from branches and torn fabric, and on it lay the mummified remains of a man, frozen mid-rest, his face half preserved by the cold. At first, they thought he might have been another missing hiker, but the artifacts surrounding him told a different story. Military dog tags, a service pistol, a rusted combat knife. His clothing was old, tattered, but unmistakably Army issue. It took weeks of forensic work before the DNA results came back. The man in the cave was identified as Elias Thorne, a former U.S. Special Forces operative who had vanished without trace in 1989 during a solo trek across Montana after being discharged for psychological trauma. Thorne's disappearance had been all but forgotten. Military records described him as unstable, suffering from prolonged combat-induced psychosis. He had served multiple tours, and according to his discharge papers, he'd become obsessed with purification, the idea that humanity had corrupted the natural world and needed cleansing. That ideology now appeared to have followed him into the wilderness. In a weathered tin box beside his cot, investigators found a second diary. The handwriting was uneven, the ink smeared, but the message was chillingly coherent. Thorne wrote of hearing the mountain's call and believing he'd been chosen to guard the sacred ice. He spoke of travelers defiling the land, leaving behind noise, plastic, greed. At first, his words read like the ramblings of a man lost to solitude. But soon, they took a darker turn. "The park is sick," one entry read. "Its veins run black with the sins of men. I must cleanse it." The further they read, the more horrifying it became. Thorne had encountered David Roach in 1998. He described him not as a scientist, but as the trespasser with machines. His diary recorded a confrontation, one that likely ended with Roach's death. In a later entry, Thorne mentioned burying him in the ice as a warning to the others. The detail matched the discovery of Roach's belongings near the glacier. Years later, It seemed Thorne's warped mission had continued long after he was presumed dead. His notes revealed that he began capturing hikers who ventured too close to his sanctuary. He called them offerings, lives taken to restore balance. The rituals he described were precise. The victims' hands bound together so they faced their own reflection, their bodies placed within the glacier to be sealed by purity. The triangle and spiral symbol, he wrote, represented the cycle of corruption and renewal, the human spirit frozen until reborn. Psychologists who reviewed the journal said Thorne had descended into a delusional messiah complex, a man driven mad by isolation, guilt, and the ghosts of war. Yet what chilled investigators most was the timing. Forensic analysis of the cave suggested he died around 2,023 years before the fishers' bodies were found. That meant someone, or something, had continued his rituals after his death. Was there a follower, a copycat, or had the madness of Elias Thorne infected others who came too close to his mountain? The authorities officially closed the case as resolved, citing Thorne as responsible for all 3 disappearances. But locals near Glacier National Park still whisper otherwise. Some claim they've seen lights flickering in the caves at night or heard distant voices carried through the snow. Rangers say it's the wind, just the glacier shifting. Yet every now and then, when the ice cracks in the stillness, it almost sounds like chains faint, echoing, as if someone beneath the frozen earth is still waiting, guarding, watching. And so the legend endures. The ghost of the glacier, not a spirit, but a man who lost his humanity to the cold, and whose madness may never have truly died with him. In the end, the truth wasn't supernatural. There was no ghost haunting the glacier, no curse sealed within the ice, only a man, broken by war and solitude, who mistook madness for purpose. Elias Thorne had fled a world he no longer understood, retreating into the silence of the mountains until the silence consumed him. What began as an escape became a delusion, a self-appointed mission to cleanse what he saw as a corrupted world. In his mind, the glacier was sacred, and those who wandered too close became sacrifices to his twisted idea of purity. When the investigation closed, the case file was marked with a single phrase: the tragedy of a fractured mind. For the families of Melissa, Grant, and David Roach, it offered a kind of closure, but not peace. Some questions can never truly be answered, especially when they come from the darkness within human nature itself. Glacier National Park still stands, vast and beautiful, but those who walk its trails now do so with quiet reverence, knowing how easily paradise can turn into hell. And perhaps that's what lingers most, not the horror, but the humanity. The reminder that evil isn't always born from cruelty, but from isolation, despair, and the slow unraveling of a soul left too long in the cold. If this story kept you on edge, if it made you think twice about the thin line between beauty and fear, subscribe to the channel. There are more stories waiting in the shadows, real lives, real mysteries, and the truths we're never meant to uncover.